Hi, you're watching AniVerse English. It was an ordinary, unremarkable weekday. Everyone was rushing about their business, some to work, some to study. Our protagonist was no exception. Suddenly, a man passing nearby noticed strange clouds. Other people also looked up at the sky when they saw it had become too dark. Suddenly, a girl passing by pointed her finger upward and screamed in surprise, asking what it was. Mark didn't understand what everyone was looking at, so he turned around and looked where the girl pointed. The next moment, he realized what had caused such great surprise and bewilderment among the people around him. The entire sky was covered with black clouds through which a bright, strange light leaked in one place. Many people became scared, and many others fell into a daze. They all thought that the end of the world had come. Suddenly, a strange white vapor descended on the city. Mark became wary when a strange blue ball appeared in front of him, gradually increasing in size. A few moments later, it transformed into something similar to the system window in video games, causing the protagonist to recoil from it in bewilderment. Looking around, Mark realized that not only he, but also others saw this. He decided to touch the window and see what would happen. The inscription that appeared there horrified Mark and others. The system reported that a world of chaos would open very soon. All healthy people between the ages of 15 and 50 from all over the world would be transferred to it. In this world, there are many fierce giant beasts, monsters, or even demons. Although this place is full of murders and all kinds of disasters, there are also many treasures and various opportunities for increasing strength. Thanks to this, you can acquire unprecedented strength and even eternal life. But do not forget that here you can lose your life at any moment if you are not careful enough. The next moment, many strange rays and lightning discharges fell to the ground. People who did not understand anything were trapped inside these rays, which did not allow them to go outside. Someone desperately knocked on the invisible wall, asking what was happening, but none of those present knew the answer. Some parents were separated from their young children and were in panic. Mark was no exception and was also enclosed in one of the beams. Suddenly, he felt that he was beginning to be pulled somewhere when he heard a strange voice say that this was the only chance to save this world, after which the teleportation was completed. When the protagonist suddenly found himself in the sky and began to rapidly fall, an unknown voice greeted him, informing him that the population of each of the villages in this world was 1,000. Looking down, Mark saw many roofs of houses peeking out from under the lush canopies of trees. A few moments later, he was already flying past these trees, inevitably approaching the ground. Suddenly, a crash was heard below him, and he fell into one of the houses, lying on the wooden floor. The first thought that came to his mind was that this world was not very friendly to its guests. A couple of minutes later, rubbing his bruised back, the guy got up and sat down, leaning against one of the walls. Immediately after this, many notifications appeared in front of him. From there, he learned that he was now in the newcomer's house, which no one could enter without Mark's consent, and resting here doubles the rate of restoration of physical strength and energy. When a notification appeared in front of him, saying that from now on the tornado screen was available to the protagonist, he was surprised and assumed that it looked like a game interface. Turning around, he noticed another window displaying his personal information. From there, he learned that he was now at the first level. His combat rating also had 1 star, and there were no awakened abilities. As for his physical indicators, his agility was rated at 9 points, strength and endurance at 8, and energy at 28. Mark studied everything carefully, then decided to look into the general chat channel to see what other people were writing. He clicked on the general chat button at the very bottom, and immediately a dialog box appeared in front of him. People wrote that, like Mark, they had found themselves in houses unfamiliar to them and did not understand at all what was happening. Many were scared to death and were afraid to even move. Again, someone panicked, thinking that they had been abducted by aliens to carry out various experiments and that they would all end. Suddenly, someone wrote in the chat that everyone should calm down, reminding them that the voice they had heard earlier said that this place was a heavenly world of chaos. After this, the stranger advised everyone to log in and look at information about themselves, then decide how to get out of there. When everyone started comparing their fight ratings, it turned out that everyone had 1 star until John wrote that he had 2 stars. The rest of the indicators were also much higher than others. He explained this by the fact that he is a boxing fan and trains a lot. Based on what was written in the chat, Mark concluded that the combat rating depends on all 4 indicators. By increasing them, you can increase your combat rating, thereby increasing the chance of survival in this world. After analyzing the performance of others, it became clear that the average value of each indicator for an ordinary person is no more than 10 points. The protagonist's own indicators of strength, agility, and endurance did not even reach 10 points, but his energy indicator was higher than that of the others, which was definitely to his advantage. Suddenly, the dialogue box disappeared and a notification appeared, indicating that Mark would now awaken his innate talent based on his 4 stats. The guy couldn't help but be intrigued. The system informed him that in this world, innate talents are divided into 9 ranks: F, E, D, C, B, A, S, SS, and SSS. The Frank is the weakest, and the SSS rank is the strongest. When a window appeared in front of the protagonist to choose whether he wanted to awaken his talent, he clicked yes without a doubt. The next moment, the space surrounding him changed again. This time, he was not falling anywhere, but was simply hovering in weightlessness, with many blue balls around him, similar to stars from afar. He looked around, trying to figure out what these balls were. Based on his many years of experience reading fantasy novels, Mark concluded that these balls were somehow related to the awakening of talent. When one of the balls almost flew into him, Mark managed to dodge it at the last moment. He was sure that a strong talent must be contained in a ball with a special color, and he needed to find it. As soon as the protagonist thought about this, many balls surrounded him. The next moment, another ball flew out of its place and rushed toward Mark. When the ball flew into his stomach, it felt as though all his insides were about to turn into mush. But a few seconds later, the ball disappeared, and the pain vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Before the protagonist had time to realize what had happened, several dozen more balls began to circle around him and, upon coming into contact with his body, dissolved into it. When it was over, Mark was breathing heavily. His head was now a complete mess. A system window appeared, congratulating him on awakening the SSS-ranked talent, Endless Extraction. This talent allowed him to use extraction on any target, receiving a random effect. Mark decided that he would need to experiment in the future to determine the limits of this talent. A few moments later, the text changed again, stating that the awakening of the newcomer's talents had been completed. It also mentioned that 787 people had awakened F-rank talent and 194 had awakened E-rank talent. After that, the discussion began again in the chat. Mark read the messages, noting that most people had F-rank and E-rank talents, with less than 2% of people having received a D-rank talent. Only 2 people had awakened C-rank talent and above, including himself. At that moment, when the protagonist was pondering who the second person with a C-rank talent was and what their rank was, someone named Alexander wrote in the chat that he had awakened a C-rank talent, which was the ability to control magnetic fields. Upon learning this, everyone began to crowd into Alexander's team, remembering that there must be another person with a strong talent. Others suggested that he might even have an S-rank talent, which caused an even more intense reaction in the chat. Mark was sure that if he revealed his rank, not everyone would accept him with open arms, or might even stab him in the back. In this world full of murders, his SSS rank talent was his main trump card in support, so he decided that no one should know about it. A window appeared, informing them that they could now leave their homes and enter the newcomer's village. In exactly 10 seconds, their first test would begin, and those who did not meet the necessary requirements would be immediately eliminated. When the system reported that newbie weapons had become available for them to equip, Mark hurried to check and reach for the system window, more and more amazed at the similarity of this world to games. Pulling out the sword, he meticulously examined it. The system reported that this weapon added 2 additional points to the attack power. The attack power itself was determined by the strength indicator. Mark decided to test the sword in action and waved it a couple of times in front of him. Afterwards, the protagonist looked at his sword in surprise. Swinging it a couple of times, he felt it could even kill a bull, and if he were to be strengthened by 30 units in the future, he could become incredibly strong. Thinking about how to improve the sword, the protagonist came up with an idea to test his talent on it. The protagonist's energy instantly enveloped the weapon. When he waved it again, a large amount of dust rose into the air. The next moment, the system reported that the endless extraction was successful. Mark had managed to extract the rust and sediment from the sword, turning it into a refined steel sword that added 5 points to attack power. The protagonist carefully examined his updated sword, amazed that just one use of his talent had not only increased the level of the sword from 0 to 1, but also enhanced its attack power. He decided to use his talent on the sword again to see what would happen. For a minute, Mark stood with his sword raised, expecting something to happen. But contrary to his expectations, a miracle did not occur. The system reported that the quality of the target was too low and the extraction limit had been reached. Exhaling in disappointment, the guy thought that he could have guessed that a skill might have a limit. If he could constantly improve an item using his skill, it would be cheating. Gripping his sword tighter, Mark intended to test what he was capable of after the upgrade. After one swing of the sword, a deep cut appeared on the wall opposite where the protagonist was standing. With a satisfied smile, Mark looked at the sword, confident that his weapon was much better than everyone else's. Voices coming from the street attracted the protagonist's attention. Turning his head towards the door, he listened carefully to the conversations. After standing like that for a couple of minutes, Mark decided he should also go outside and look around. The next moment, holding the sword, he took the first step into a new world unknown to him, full of hidden dangers. Once outside, Mark looked wearily at the other people nearby. Someone was complaining that this world was too cruel, as they were given only 7 days to complete the test and increase their level to 10. At some point, the protagonist realized that everyone was flocking to a large blue portal a couple of 100 meters from their houses. No one dared to go inside. The bravest ones came closer, hoping to hear some sounds from the other side to gauge its danger. Mark followed the crowd, approaching the mysterious portal. He assumed that this was the exit from the village of newcomers, beyond which lay a world of murder and bloodshed. Looking at the alluring blue glow, he wondered who would be the first to dare to step into the unknown. Suddenly, there was a loud sound from behind, as if something was collapsing. This attracted everyone's attention, and people turned around anxiously, peering into the distance through the rising column of dust. As the dust settled back to the ground, people saw a man standing in the middle of a small crater. Upon closer inspection, Mark recognized him as Ivan, whose combat power from the start was 2 stars. The people who approached him looked at him enthusiastically, shouting that he was very strong and tough. The man was flattered by such attention and smiled, saying that his talent for frantic strength could triple his power when used. Mark remembered that Ivan had previously said he had 18 power points. If they were tripled, this figure should increase to 54. With such abilities, it was not surprising that he was able to destroy the boulder with one blow. People continued to approach Ivan, admiring his strength and forgetting about the portal. The man smiled contentedly, listening to their praise. Remembering all his hard daily training, he thought that in this world, all his work would pay off, and he would have the best time of his life here. Suddenly, a boy standing nearby remembered that Alexander was also here, who had a C-rank skill. He was interested to know how strong he was. Ivan grimaced with displeasure. He did not understand what was so special about a C-rank talent in a world where the fittest survive and the strongest are those with more brute strength. He raised his hand, drawing all attention to himself, and asked for a minute of attention. The next moment, he declared that he was going to volunteer and leave the village to see how strong the monsters were outside. Everyone cheerfully supported him, shouting that his courage knew no bounds. Ivan stepped inside the portal without hesitation. Watching his retreating back, Mark thought that this jock had absolutely no brains. He should not try to lead everyone if he did not have complete confidence in their survival. Meanwhile, Ivan wandered through the forest located on the other side of the portal. He was sure that this world was ruled by brute force. When he killed the beast, he would return and show everyone who was in charge. Suddenly, he heard some rustling nearby. The man turned around, looking for someone, confident that the enemy was nearby. He took a defensive stance and suddenly felt danger coming from something behind him. Ivan slowly turned around, trying to suppress his fear, and attacked a monster that was several meters taller than himself, but it did not seem to feel anything. A system window suddenly appeared, reporting that Ivan had been killed by a level 1 beast, a bloody rabbit. Afterwards, the system reported that animals also had combat ratings. The first level was equal to 3 stars, the second 4 stars, the third 5 stars, and so on. Now, they were being held back by a protective barrier installed around the village, but in 7 days it would disappear. Mark was surprised that Ivan was killed by the weakest level 1 beast in less than 5 minutes of being there. This meant that the difficulty of surviving in this world was much higher than he originally thought. He also realized that the system would not allow newcomers to simply stay in the village, having previously reported that soon the protective barrier would fall and monsters would penetrate here. Mark also realized that there had to be some way to successfully pass this test. There was no point in the system giving them something they couldn't handle. Suddenly, someone raised their weapon, attracting attention, and shouted that they could not just sit and wait for their deaths. They needed to kill monsters and become stronger. Someone supported him and suggested that they create groups. After that, everyone began to voice their skills and characteristics, uniting into suitable groups. After some time, several teams approached the portal. Those who had not yet chosen their partners stood on the sidelines, having made a plan. One of the teams decided to go in first. Mark was among the singles who had not yet decided whom to team up with. A guy approached him and suggested joining a group, but the protagonist refused the offer and resolutely headed towards the portal. Squeezing the hilt of his sword, he thought that while working together was undoubtedly a good option, it wasn't for him. He needed to hide his skill until he became strong enough. He counted down 15 minutes after the first team entered and, deciding that should be enough, went in next. His goal was to raise several levels and become stronger. After passing through the portal, Mark found himself in a dark forest. He carefully looked around, unsure of what dangers could await him in this unfamiliar world, apart from ferocious monsters. The further he walked, the more it seemed he was in a primordial world. He wouldn't have been surprised if a dinosaur emerged from the nearby bushes. Suddenly, he smelled a strange odor but couldn't pinpoint its source. Following the scent, which grew stronger and stronger, he came across a body in a pool of blood. Taking a closer look, Mark realized it was Ivan, who had entered the forest first. The protagonist wasn't surprised. Ivan had acted recklessly and overestimated himself, leading to such an end. But seeing the corpse made Mark realize that he too could die here at any moment. After standing for a few moments, he turned around and continued on. Mark thought that if he wanted to stay alive, he needed to be extremely careful and increase his strength. Suddenly, a thought came to him that made him stop and turn around. He approached Ivan's corpse, squatted down, and decided to try out the idea that had come to his mind. Placing his hand on the man's stomach, he used his extraction talent. Moments later, a system window appeared, informing him that the extraction was successful and that Mark had gained a talent, violent power. Looking at Ivan's corpse, Mark thought that if his strength previously increased threefold with his talent, his own strength should now increase from 8 points to 24. Mark smiled at the thought that he could instantly become twice as strong as the average adult. He realized why his innate talent had such a high rank. Over time, he could acquire hundreds, even thousands, of innate talents from others. He was confident that with all these talents, he could reach the very top of human capabilities. Mark looked contemptuously at the corpse in front of him. Noticing a sword next to Ivan, he decided to pick it up. Applying extraction to it, he removed the rust and turned it into a refined steel sword. During the short time Mark spent in the forest, he realized that thanks to his talent, he could eliminate his weaknesses and become the strongest in this world. Walking a little further, the protagonist came across the corpse of a giant hare. Kneeling next to the dead carcass of the monster, He carefully examined its wounds and concluded that the hare could have died from blows to the back after being surrounded. He decided to try using extraction on the monster. Moments later, the system reported that he had gained 2 power points as a result of the extraction. Mark was pleasantly surprised. Rising, the satisfied protagonist thought that if he used frantic strength, his strength points would increase to 30. If he encountered more similar monsters, he would gain even more strength. The protagonist tried to use his extraction ability on this hare again, but the system informed him that extraction could only be used once on a target lower than the 20th level. Mark sighed in disappointment and decided that while he still had the opportunity, he should look for other corpses and use his talent on them. Remembering the group that had entered earlier, he assumed they had already killed several monsters along the way. If he simply followed them, he would find more corpses. Looking carefully at his feet, he found the path with the most tracks. Sometime later, he suddenly stopped when the system reported that one of the newcomers had been killed by a level 1 rodent. Mark was wary of this information. He remembered that this person was in the group whose footsteps he was now following. He recalled that when he applied extraction to Ivan's corpse, he received his talent, and the rabbit had given him 2 strength points. This made him think that level 1 beasts were too weak. They had no innate talents and relied on brute force, so he only managed to gain a few stat points. Mark thought it would be better to find the corpse of a stronger person and gain another talent. An idea came to him. Moments later, he climbed onto one of the branches of a tall tree. Looking around, he wasn't entirely sure where the group had gone. After standing like this for several minutes, he decided to stick to the path he had walked earlier. When the system again reported that another member of the group had been killed by a rodent, Mark was perplexed. Despite his doubts and fears, he decided to continue his journey. Suddenly, he heard the roar of a beast from somewhere ahead. Mark no longer doubted the chosen direction and resolutely jumped down, thinking that if he wanted to become stronger and survive in this world, he should take a risk and face his fears. A few seconds later, the protagonist landed successfully. Soon, the forest ended, and Mark was making his way through the thick field grass. He constantly reminded himself that this world was dangerous. If he stumbled even once, he would no longer live. Therefore, he tried to move in a way that would not attract unnecessary attention from any monsters that might be nearby. Suddenly, he smelled a faint odor of blood. The further he walked, the stronger the smell became. Mark decided he was almost there and stopped to take a closer look. A few meters ahead, he saw the body of a dead man and assumed he was the first victim of the rodent. A little further away, the protagonist noticed a dead girl. Mark understood that the monster that killed them was still somewhere nearby, and it was not worth exposing himself yet. The next moment, he saw something that shocked him. A level 1 rodent, its size rivaling that of the giant hare. Mark smiled faintly, thinking this was the right opportunity. Normally, he would be no match for a 3-star monster, but this one was seriously injured and had broken legs. The protagonist was sure it would be easy to kill in its current state. Approaching a little closer, he jumped out of his hiding place and, activating violent power, raised one of his swords above his head. The rodent heard the rustling behind it and turned towards Mark. The next moment, the monster raised one of its clawed paws towards the approaching protagonist. Mark quickly reacted and threw one of his swords at the rodent, pinning it to the ground in the blink of an eye. Landing on the monster's carcass, Mark forcefully drove the sword blade deeper into its body. The rodent let out a furious roar, but Mark wasn't going to stop there. Gathering strength in his fist, he punched the monster in the face. Jumping off its body, the protagonist exhaled tiredly, realizing he had underestimated this wounded rodent. The idea of sneaking up on it had turned out to be much more dangerous than he had imagined. Suddenly, Mark noticed that a strange blue vapor began to emanate from the monster's body. He froze warily, not understanding what was happening. The next moment, the steam enveloped his hand, and the system reported that, for killing a level 1 rodent, Mark received 30 energy points. After that, a window with his characteristics appeared in front of him. Carefully studying the information, he noticed that not only had his strength indicator changed, but the status of his first level had changed from 0 out of 100 points to 30 out of 100. When the window disappeared, the protagonist approached the rodent, took out his sword from its carcass, and thought that he had made a good start towards increasing his strength. He then used extraction on the monster. The extraction was successful, and the system reported that the protagonist received 2 agility points. Mark noticed that the attribute points gained from first-level monsters were too small and that he needed to look for monsters at a higher level. Remembering why he came here, the guy headed towards the dead bodies of the newcomers from his village. After applying extraction to the man, Mark received an F-rank talent, Enhanced Sense of Smell. Although it was a low-rank talent, it would help him find corpses much faster. After thinking a little, he pulled off the man's apron. To his surprise, it slid off the corpse quite easily. Mark spread it on the ground, thinking that the acquired talent would also help him detect monsters in advance and avoid danger. When everything was ready, he placed his swords on the apron folded on the ground. Then he used extraction again. The system reported that the rust and sediment were successfully removed from the short sword, transforming it into a purified steel sword. Mark wrapped his swords in cloth and rose from his knees. He then threw the weapon behind his back, tying the apron's laces into a knot on his chest. After looking around, he activated his sense of smell enhancement talent. Immediately, his nose was filled with a variety of different smells. At some point, he detected an unpleasant odor. He took a deeper breath, trying to catch the smell, and succeeded. A strong stench seemed to fill the entire surrounding space. Mark deactivated the ability and immediately covered his mouth with his hand, fighting the urge to vomit. He stood there for several seconds, then decided he needed to relax and get used to it, learning to distinguish each smell. Using the talent again, the protagonist tried to relax as much as possible, focusing only on the smells around him. At some point, he detected a very light, pleasant aroma. When he tried to identify it, this aroma was mixed with a sharper, stronger one. Mark realized it was dirt. A few moments later, he managed to catch the pleasant aroma again and guessed it was the scent of flowers. Suddenly, he smelled several other aromas but couldn't identify them. The next moment, he heard people screaming in the distance. Mark realized that someone was approaching. At the same time, Nico was desperately trying to escape from an angry giant rodent, which was chasing him at incredible speed. Suddenly, the monster jumped straight at Nico, its claws shrouded in electricity. Nico got lucky. The claws landed on his side, digging deep into the ground and causing him to fly into the air. The man sitting in the ambush shouted for everyone to attack. Several people jumped out of the tall grass, raising their swords above their heads. A few moments later, the rodent fell dead. The system then reported that the group received 30 energy points for killing it. Looking at the dead carcass in front of him, Douglas remarked that their group was unlucky to encounter 2 rodents at once and lose several members. One of the guys took out his anger by slashing the dead body of the monster several times. This behavior displeased Douglas, who then said they should hurry up and finish off the other wounded rodent. After his words, everyone rushed to follow their leader. Our protagonist had been sitting nearby all this time, hiding in the grass and overhearing their conversation. He realized that the 2 killed, on whom he had used the extraction, were their comrades. Based on this assumption, it was not difficult to guess that the rodents he killed belonged to them. Mark decided he should leave as quickly as possible to avoid trouble. He activated his speed enhancement talent, mentally apologized to those guys, and dashed in the opposite direction with impressive speed. For several hours, he wandered around, assessing the situation on the plane of newcomers. From what he saw, he noted that in addition to the giant rodent and the bloody rabbit, there were other types of first-level beasts, such as the plain wolf, the rabid boar, and the poisonous snake of the 9 rings. After stumbling upon another carcass of a rabid boar, Mark tried to use extraction on it, but the system reported that the extraction was unsuccessful. The limit for extracting the same first-level animals had been reached after 3 successful attempts. Mark sighed in disappointment, remembering that he had already used extraction 3 times on all the animals except the 9-ring snake. He needed to focus on finding it. Turning his gaze to the dead body of one of the newcomers, Mark knelt beside him and began the extraction. Reflecting on the 7 deaths announced in the last hour, he found it strange that he had only managed to find 1 corpse. Deciding not to dwell on it, he continued with the extraction, which was successful. He acquired the talent for improving vision. After looking at his stats window, Mark saw that his strength, agility, and endurance had significantly increased, with his strength now rated at 2 stars. He smiled contentedly, confident that he could now defeat a first-level beast alone. Suddenly, he detected a strange smell and became alert, trying to identify it. When he realized it was the smell of the 9-ringed snake, he relaxed and smiled, thinking that luck was on his side today. Using his acceleration skill, he followed the scent. Along the way, he also detected an aroma similar to flowers or fruits. A few minutes later, he saw a huge snake coiled around one of the tree trunks. Below, it was an unusual flower from which the pleasant aroma emanated. Mark stopped and hid behind a tree at a safe distance from the monster. He reasoned that since the 9-ringed snake was guarding this plant with an unusual aroma, it was clear that it was there for a reason. Turning his gaze from the flower to the snake, Mark thought it was a good opportunity to test his strength against the strongest of the first-level monsters. Smiling to himself, he reached for the swords on his back. At that moment, the 9-ringed snake, which had been peacefully sleeping, opened its bright azure eyes and noticed his presence. Rising on the branches, it began to peer in his direction. The next moment, it lunged straight at Mark. He managed to jump away as the snake struck and broke the tree trunk. Confused by the snake's sluggishness, Mark assumed it was because it had recently eaten and was digesting its prey. He decided not to hesitate and drew one of his swords, using his strength enhancement talent. He turned towards the 9-ringed snake and attacked, but his blows did not harm it, and the snake continued its rapid approach. Mark was thrown into confusion when the snake came close, opening its mouth. He struck again, but the monster's scales were too strong to penetrate. Suddenly, the powerful tail of the 9-ringed snake appeared behind him, which Mark noticed too late. He didn't have time to react before feeling a strong blow to his back. He fell to the ground with a cry of pain as his back collided with the hard surface. Before he could fully recover, the snake opened its wide mouth above him. Mark prevented the snake from devouring him by plunging his sword into its roof. Furious with pain, the snake threw its head high into the sky, pulling Mark along with it. To prevent himself from falling from such a height, he grabbed one of its front fangs while still holding onto his sword. Finding the right moment, he pulled it out and cut the body of the 9-ringed snake while in the air. He attacked the snake's body several more times, slicing it into many pieces. Lastly, he struck the snake's head, finally finishing it off. When he landed on the ground, the system reported that he had received 40 energy points for killing the 9-ringed snake. Mark looked at the monster's chopped body, thinking that if he hadn't had a full stomach, he might not have dealt with the snake so easily. He decided to cut open its stomach to see what was inside. The next moment, Mark saw a man covered in the monster's gastric juices. Looking at the dead man, the protagonist was once again reminded that in this world of chaos, everyone can die. The only difference is how exactly you die. The predator feeds on the prey, and the fittest survives. These are the laws of this world. After standing there for a while, Mark sat down next to the corpse and used extraction on it. The system reported that he had once again received the talent for improving vision. 2 identical enhancement talents would be automatically combined, resulting in an improvement of this talent and granting him the skill, Eye of True Vision, capable of seeing the true essence of things. Mark hadn't suspected that something like this was possible, but it only worked to his advantage. He decided to use the new skill to understand how it worked. Looking at the plan in front of him, he saw a system window revealing that it was a red snake fruit of the first level, which increases stamina and resistance to poisons. Mark approached the flower and picked the fruit from it. Smiling contentedly, he realized that his new skill would allow him to easily obtain information about unknown things, providing a great advantage in the future when collecting useful resources. Without much thought, he took a bite of the fruit. It turned out to be very sweet and pleasant to the taste. A few seconds later, the protagonist felt a strange sensation spreading throughout his body, after which the system reported that Mark had received 8 stamina points and his resistance to poisons had increased by 100%. He thoughtfully touched his stomach, noting that 8 stat points could be obtained after extracting from 4 killed monsters. It would be great to find more such fruits. Mark used the Eye of True Sight skill again to check if this plant had other uses. The system reported that this spiritual plant accumulates the essence of heaven and earth. After collecting the red snake fruit, the leaves of the flower would automatically wither and become useless in a few days. Determined not to let the spiritual plant disappear, he knelt down and used extraction again. The extraction was successful, and a red ball of spiritual plant essence appeared in his palm. Using it would grant Mark 2 stamina points. He smiled, his guess proving correct. The plant on which the red snake fruit grew could not be useless. The protagonist ate the red essence ball without hesitation, raising his power level to the peak of the 2nd star. Mark was pleased. He did not expect to be so lucky and reach the top of the 2nd star in such a short time. Now, he felt ready to fight the 3 monsters of the 1st level alone. He gripped his sword tighter, coming up with the idea of using the 9 rings extraction on another snake before leaving the rookie village. Mark decided to head to larger lands to find other monsters and become stronger. Suddenly, he noticed several impressively sized stones flying towards him. The protagonist jumped to the side to avoid the attack and landed on a nearby tree, intending to determine who had set up the ambush. Once on the highest branch, he looked ahead and realized that no one had ambushed him. Another 9-ringed snake was fighting someone nearby. On the snake's head was a boy, unknown to Mark, holding a sword stuck into the snake's muzzle. At the same time, a man in the air raised his sword above his head, intending to cut the monster's body. His comrades stood below, weapons ready. One of the girls held a beam and tried to aim at the snake's weak point. Sam, their leader, shouted for everyone to attack, and they all followed his order, plunging their swords into the body of the 9-ringed snake. Mark watched closely, surprised to see Sam here. He remembered this guy because he was one of the 17 people with a D rank and the ability to control light. Their combined attack only angered the snake more, and Sam was thrown back as the snake's body flew upward. The girl with the bow hurried to her leader, excitedly asking if he was okay. He replied that she shouldn't worry about him and to quickly finish off the snake while they had the chance. Following his words, everyone rushed to attack again. Standing aside, Mark decided to use his Eye of True Sight on the living 9-ringed snake. He learned that, besides being extremely poisonous, the only notable feature of this snake was a 0.1% chance of prey. Mark was disappointed with this information, expecting something more useful. A sudden flash of light forced him to cover his face with his hands. Moments later, everything stopped, and Mark was able to see Sam's group standing near the corpse of the huge snake. Some were annoyed that they received too few energy points compared to others. Alicia, near her leader, began to bandage his wounds. Mark considered this the right moment and decided to climb down from the tree. His landing went unnoticed by the group. At some point, Sam's body was enveloped in a green glow, and all his wounds were healed. When his group members asked what had happened, he replied that his level had increased. Everyone began to joyfully congratulate their leader for breaking through to the 2nd level. During this time, Mark managed to get closer to them and hid behind one of the tree trunks, where it would be difficult to notice him. Using the Eye of True Sight on Sam, he learned that Sam's strength, agility, endurance, and energy parameters each had 20 points. Combined with his D-rank talent, his overall strength barely reached 3 stars. Even though Mark had not yet reached the 2nd level, his combat strength was at the peak of 2 stars. Considering all his talents, his overall strength should be somewhere at the level of 4 stars. Mark was confident that he could easily defeat Sam, who was at the 1st level, with his own strength at the 2nd level. George, the youngest of their group, proposed avenging their dead comrade, who was still inside another 9-ringed snake. When Sam asked what had happened to Pierre, the boy explained that they were scouting the area together and had come across 2 9-ringed snakes. They immediately tried to flee, but Pierre tripped and fell, resulting in him being swallowed by one of the snakes. George had managed to escape using his speed enhancement talent. After hearing this, Sam's expression changed, and he stepped forward, declaring that they would definitely avenge their dead comrade. Mark became wary when he realized that these guys intended to find the snake he had just killed. He decided it would be better to sneak out of there quietly. As he was moving close to the tree where he was hiding, Alicia heard a strange, rustling sound and, without hesitation, shot an arrow. The arrow narrowly missed Mark's face and pierced the ground where he had been standing. Alicia then pointed her bow at the tree, believing someone was hiding behind it, and shouted for the stranger to come out. Mark had no choice but to reveal himself, assuming that Alicia had a talent for improving hearing. Surprise appeared on the girl's face when she recognized him, and she lowered her bow. She called him by name, and Mark, surprised, asked how she knew his name. Alicia explained, somewhat embarrassed, that she had seen him in the chat. Sam looked at Alicia, asking if she knew this guy. She awkwardly waved her hands in denial, saying it was just that she had seen him in the chat. Mark was suspicious of her explanation, as there were about 1,000 people in the chat, and it would require a phenomenal memory to recall a single name. He decided to wait for them to leave, so he could apply the extraction of 9 rings on the snake's corpse. However, to his disappointment, the group was in no hurry to leave. Alicia broke the silence by asking Sam if Mark could join them, given that they had lost one of their comrades. She thought it would be beneficial to have him in their team. Sam looked at Mark appraisingly. He considered that the difference in fighting strength between people and local monsters was too great, so working together was necessary. He needed as many people as possible on his team. Sam nodded to his thoughts and asked Mark to show his characteristics and talents. If Mark proved useful, he would be invited to join the team. Alicia enthusiastically told Mark that he was lucky to meet them because Sam was a D rank and at the 2nd level. Following him would ensure safety. Mark spread his arms and replied that he preferred to work alone. With that, he turned around and walked in the opposite direction. When Alicia tried to follow him, Sam stopped her, saying that they did not force others to join against their will, and if he didn't want to join, they should let him go. As the team turned to leave, Alicia lingered for a moment, sadly looking at Mark's retreating back. Even though she didn't remember him, she hoped he would survive in this world. When the group reached the place where the other snake was supposed to be, they were shocked to find that the monster had been chopped into pieces. Among the remains, they saw the body of their dead comrade. The astonished group began to speculate about who could have done this. One of the members approached a stub of the snake's tail and, after examining it, concluded that the snake had been killed about 15 minutes ago, and not just killed, but with a single blow. Sam continued to investigate and noticed traces of only one person. Although he didn't know who it was, he was certain that this person was a loner and incredibly strong. Hearing Sam's words, Alicia excitedly suggested that it could be Mark since he was the only one nearby and had refused to join them. Before Sam could respond, a system window appeared, informing him that someone had already reached the 3rd level and that the top 100 ranking by level was now available. Seeing that Mark was only at the 1st level and was in 47th place, Sam thought with disappointment that they must have been mistaken in their assumptions. Mark could not have killed the monster alone. Mark himself was also disappointed, realizing he was only in 47th place. He stretched and looked at the leaderboard, noting that 8 people had already reached the 2nd level and 1 had reached the 3rd. He needed to push harder, since the extraction of 1st-level monsters had reached its limit. It was time to go hunting. Suddenly, the system made another announcement. The first to reach level 10 would receive a gold chest, the second a silver chest, and the third a bronze chest. Mark was intrigued by this reward system. The system added that the first 100 newcomers to reach level 10 would also receive a chest, with ranks ranging from dark steel to mythical. Mark was determined to aim for first place, believing that a higher-ranked chest would contain better items. He activated his acceleration talent and set off in search of monsters, fortunately finding his first opponent quickly. On his way, he came across a first-level silver wolf with 4 stars. In battle with it, the protagonist activated his talents to increase speed and strength. He dodged the wolf's deadly claws and inflicted equally dangerous attacks with his sword. To his surprise, It didn't help. The wolf's skin was too tough, and his attacks had virtually no effect. He urgently needed to figure out how to get out of the situation and defeat the beast. Many thoughts spun in the protagonist's head as he tried to form a shaky plan, while the monster slowly approached him. Although Mark didn't know it, this wolf was very unusual. It had its own mind and was unhappy with the invasion of its territory. It was wary of Mark, who was stronger than any person on the 3rd level despite being on the 1st level. When the wolf jumped at Mark, he assumed its weak point was its belly. Mark did not miss the opportunity and placed his blades right under the approaching monster. In the next moment, the wolf ran straight into the blade of Mark's sword, and it went right through him. The protagonist staggered as the huge carcass of the wolf hung on him. He threw the wolf off onto the ground. Looking at the wolf, Mark said it was the strongest monster he had ever encountered and expressed regret that he would die today. After these words, the protagonist raised his sword above his head and delivered the final blow to the wolf. Immediately after, the system reported that Mark had reached the 2nd level, with all his characteristics increasing by 10 points. At the same moment, a pleasant sensation overcame his whole body. When it passed, he felt truly stronger. All his wounds had healed, and his state of mind had been restored. A few moments later, a dark steel-ranked chest appeared in front of him. Mark closed his eyes and prayed for a rank 2 weapon. After opening the chest, a beam of bright light enveloped the protagonist, and a 2nd-rank weapon appeared, a blood wolf combat sword that increased the chance of injury by 100%. Holding his new sword, Mark felt confident that he was now not afraid of encountering other stronger monsters. Just as he thought this, he was surrounded by a whole pack of wolves. The wolves approached him, growling angrily, but Mark was not afraid. He grinned, thinking that these wolves had come at a perfect time for him to try out his new sword in battle. The next moment, he swung his sword, attacking one of the wolves. At the same time, another wolf sneaked up from behind. Mark noticed this wolf when it was almost upon him. Quickly turning around, he plunged the blade of his sword into the monster's chest, piercing right through it. Giving the wolves a contemptuous look, Mark said they were no match for him. He then launched several lightning attacks. When several wolves rushed at him simultaneously, not even a minute had passed before the entire pack was killed, leaving only Mark, who had not received a scratch. He noted that after leveling up, his speed and strength had increased significantly. However, he was annoyed that he still hadn't had the chance to reveal all the secrets of this place. This world, over and over again, reminded him that this was not a dream, but the real world. Taking one last look at the wolves he had killed, the protagonist turned around and moved on in search of other monsters. He was determined to gain strength and become the strongest person to find a way out of this nightmare. At the same time, Sam's group came across another monster, which the guy was able to deal with in a couple of moments without receiving a single injury. The leader's increased strength was admired by other group members. Then the system suddenly announced that Mark was the first to kill a mutated monster and received 1 prestige point. Everyone was shocked and did not understand how he managed it. Some suggested that mutated monsters were not that strong and that their leader could easily handle one. However, a few moments later, several system notifications arrived, reporting the death of 4 newcomers at the hands of mutated monsters. Sam was amazed that among those killed was a person with level 2. In fact, these monsters were quite strong, and they needed to be more careful in the future. When the next window appeared showing that the ranking had changed and Mark was now in 5th place, everyone was even more amazed. Sam decided not to focus on this strange guy and told his group to continue hunting to avoid falling behind. Meanwhile, the tired protagonist sat on a mountain of the wolves he had killed, raising his head to watch the clouds change color from orange to red. Suddenly, a notification came from a group chat. Someone asked for help. All members of the group of the boy unknown to Mark had died, and only he managed to escape. The next message described in more detail that a person from the 2nd level and 4 from the 1st level had been killed by a beast whose strength was simply terrifying. It was much stronger than the beasts of the 2nd level. The message also indicated the survivor's location. Mark imagined a map in his head. The place was not far from him. If he hurried, he could get there in 5 minutes. He wondered whether he should go there or continue wandering around. Ultimately, the fact that it was a mutated beast outweighed all his other considerations, because killing it would earn him 2 to 3 times more energy than killing ordinary animals. Mark arrived in less than 5 minutes. Sniffing, he recognized a smell beside the dead bodies and a fanged boar. Although he did not encounter it often, this smell definitely belonged to a bloody rabbit. The protagonist decided he was simply mistaken, as different types of animals usually do not appear in one place. Before looking around, he decided it was worth using extraction on the corpses. Mark was perplexed when he managed to extract only 2 agility points instead of a talent. This seemed strange to him, so he decided to reapply the extraction. Contrary to his expectations, a red system window appeared, indicating that the extraction had failed. Mark looked at his palm in confusion. The last time something like this happened was when he reached the limit of level 1 wild beast extraction. He wondered what the issue was now. He tried to extract the talents of others and managed to acquire the talent of enhancing smell and increasing endurance. Mark assumed he had previously failed to extract the talent because he already had one of a higher rank and this person had a talent of a lower rank. Deciding not to dwell on it, he took everything he could and reached for the sword lying nearby. Mark thought that with the new stamina enhancement talent he had acquired, he now had all the innate talents for the 4 stats: strength, agility, energy, and endurance. His reasoning was interrupted when he noticed a staff a little further away and nearby traces as if someone had been dragged. Mark frowned. It seemed strange because a fanged boar would not drag a person somewhere. A sudden realization horrified him. A boar would not drag the body of its victim unless it intended to eat it. Applying acceleration, Mark rushed toward the beast's hideout, hoping to find the body and extract the innate talent of the person before he was devoured. In moments, he found himself at the entrance to a cave that emanated danger. Mark decided he was making things up, as the fanged boar was only a mutated beast of the 1st level and shouldn't be too difficult to defeat. Sensing someone's approach, a 9-ring snake instantly reacted and rushed toward the entrance with a terrible hiss. Mark managed to dodge its attack. However, the system window that appeared put him in a stupor. In front of him was a mutated snake of 10 rings, a 1st-level beast with 5 stars and the ability to create a poisonous cloud. The protagonist reached for his sword, bewildered. This was the first time he had encountered a beast with 5 stars. The mutated wolf he killed was at the same level, but only had 4 stars. Dodging another furious attack from the beast, he decided to be extremely careful. However, the next moment, the snake released poison directly into Mark's face. He instantly covered his face with his hands to avoid inhaling the poison, but soon he felt terrible pain in his eyes and dropped his weapon, covering his eyes with his palms. Feeling vulnerable, he heard several animals rushing at him simultaneously. Mark tried to see who was approaching, but the snake's venom had affected his eyes, and he could see practically nothing. A strong roar was heard from the cave, and the protagonist was unable to repel the attack, crashing into the wall. The situation was turning dire. Randomly waving his sword in front of him, Mark shouted that even if he couldn't see, he would never die here. At the same moment, he heard a carcass fall to the floor. When one of the animals let out an enraged roar and ran toward Mark, he activated his sense of smell enhancement talent and jumped forward. He managed to kill the fanged boar and the bloody rabbit blindly, though the rodent managed to escape unnoticed. Mark tried to locate another monster using only his sense of smell and hearing. When the snake attacked him again, he jumped away, anticipating the attack from behind. Gripping his sword tightly, Mark charged straight at the monster with a furious cry. He managed to jump onto the snake's head and plunge his sword into it. With every second, the blade pierced deeper into its skin, causing the snake to hiss painfully. When it fell limply, Mark got off and leaned against its body, sinking to the ground. He thought that if it weren't for his endurance talent, he would have died long ago. Exhausted, his eyes began to close, and he felt sleepy. Although he knew it was dangerous to fall asleep here, he no longer had the strength to resist. However, His strength soon began to return, and his vision started to recover. Mark looked at his hands in surprise, not understanding what was happening. When he noticed the system window in front of him, he laughed loudly, covering his eyes with his hand. He was incredibly lucky. His level had increased after the snake's death. Even if he had lost his limbs, they would be restored with the increase in level. Laughing off, Mark looked at the system window again. The message had changed. For killing a 10-ring snake, he received a chest with a reward. He decided not to hesitate and opened it immediately, feeling very happy when he received something useful. Afterwards, Mark rose to his feet and walked into the depths of the cave, carefully looking around. A few minutes later, he came across a spatial gate. As he approached it, he had a hunch that all the monsters he encountered came from this portal. After some hesitation, Mark went inside, confident that with his current strength, he no longer needed to fear surprise attacks from the monsters. As soon as he found himself on the other side of the portal, he saw many different plants growing directly from the stone. Using the eye of true sight, Mark learned that these were all first-level spirit plants. Suddenly, he felt a terrible pressure. Looking in the other direction, he tried to determine the source of this strange force and saw several monsters and a dead man surrounded by them. The system reported that Mark had entered another dimension. He was drawn to a strange monster sitting atop a mountain of bones. Using the eye of true vision, he saw that this monster was of the 4th level and had a combat strength of 6 stars. The protagonist was surprised, as he had never encountered a monster with 6 stars before. Considering that the monster's skills and talents were hidden, its strength might be equal to 7 stars, if not more. Mark couldn't help but be uneasy about the monster's strange weapon. The scythe it wielded emanated an ominous aura, and the monster itself looked very intimidating. He decided it was better to leave quickly and return when he was stronger, as he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand a battle against it now. However, before he could even take a step, he felt an overwhelming pressure, preventing him from moving. Sig Freed noticed Mark and pointed at him, saying that since he had come, he should stay. The monster's body would be used for Sig Freed's rebirth. At that moment, the animals surrounding him simultaneously rushed at Mark. The protagonist reached for his sword, realizing he had no choice but to fight to escape. When the chains released by the monster attacked Mark, he managed to dodge the blow, but the chains continued to pursue him. No matter how much he dodged, the protagonist realized that these chains were likely the monster's skill. At some point, attacks from the animals also joined in, making it harder to avoid attacks from multiple directions. During one of these moments, Mark was too distracted by the beasts and fell into the grip of the monster's chains. He tried to free himself, but the chains only tightened, restricting his movement. Sig Freed smiled contentedly and remarked that these animals were too stupid to drag a living person, only capable of dragging a couple of corpses. Today was a miracle because he could finally be reborn in a living body. As the animals rushed at Mark, suspended in the air, the protagonist was sure that if he didn't free himself from the chains, he would die. Using his talent of frantic power, Mark managed to break the chains that bound him, throwing the monsters back. He then rushed towards Sig Freed, causing the monster surprised. Usually, people from the small world had minds at the level of 30 points, but Mark somehow managed to escape his mind control. As Mark jumped on him, raising his sword above his head, the monster remained calm on his pile of human bones. The next moment, sharp needles pierced Mark's body. Fairly battered, he sank to the ground, lowering his sword. Sig Freed smiled smugly, claiming that no person could resist his ability to penetrate the mind. He said that Mark would be honored to give his body to him. The protagonist grinned and looked up at Sig Freed, replying that this would not happen. He then told the system to add all his stat points to his mind. The monster's smile grew even wider as he said he would throw Mark's soul into the flames of hell, tearing it into small pieces and turning it into ashes. Throwing the protagonist into the wall with all his strength, Sig Freed ordered the fanged boar to kill Mark. Although the monster could not see Mark due to rising dust clouds, he felt his mind had become stronger. The protagonist managed to hold off the beast's attack with the help of a storage ring he had received as a reward for defeating the ten-ring snake, which allowed him to retrieve his weapon. Suddenly, Mark felt someone else's influence on his consciousness. Sig Freed said that even if Mark had temporarily escaped his control, he was still no match for him. As the animals rushed at Mark again, terrifying him, he needed at least a couple of seconds to get rid of Sig Freed's influence. He watched contentedly, confident that he would soon get a new body. When his animals simultaneously fell to the ground, Sig Freed was in a stupor.